Hello, I'm Georgina Rose and welcome to the Darling YouTube channel. On this channel, we discuss everything related to mysticism, religion, the occult, magic, and everything on the fringes of esoterica. And in this video, I'm going to be kind of having a conversation about something that is really more just a list of things that I think are not discussed. And these are what I'd like to call hard truths about mysticism. So when you look online, people are obviously going to present mysticism in a way that is digestible, and really focuses on positive. And mysticism has been nothing but a positive influence on my life. That's not where I'm going with this. But in their way of doing that, to present mysticism to people, there's certain things that I don't think people are really telling people. And I think that's a conversation that needs to be had so that we all are aware of what we're doing and having our practice be as productive and positive as possible. Now, before I get into the subject matter, I'd like to give an announcement. I'm hosting a group esoteric pilgrimage trip with the lovely people at Trova Trip. You can sign up in the description box below. There'll be a link to. The first 8 people to sign up will get a major discount on the ticket, which includes everything but airfare. So yeah, it'll be really, really exciting to see all the beautiful religious sites in India, a country that has such a rich and powerful esoteric tradition associated with it. Without further ado, let's get into the hard truths about mysticism and the occult. So the first hard truth is that what you do every single day is going to have a greater impact than what you do every couple of weeks or once a month. A lot of people who are into spirituality do things like full moon rituals or, things for specific holidays, or basically like big rituals now and again. And those are going to have an impact. You should be doing those, right? You should not be doing, only small daily rituals, right? No, you should be doing these big rituals. But if you are only doing these big rituals, it's going to have less of an impact than if you are doing daily, short, simple rituals. Because what we do over time compounds and creates our spiritual growth. Consistency is really, really important if you want to make spiritual progress. And so definitely think about how is this compounding? So do the big rituals, but also do not neglect the small rituals because you'll lose so much progress. And if you had to really reduce the amount of time you spend on your path, I would recommend doing the smaller daily rituals instead of occasional, really big, elaborate rituals because of what it means over time. So the second hard truth is honestly about your results. So if you are doing mysticism properly, you will be purifying your heart, going through a process of alchemical transmutation and getting closer to the divine, right? The goal of mysticism is largely to unite with the divine, to purify yourself, to reach enlightenment. You can call it a lot of things. And if you are doing a spiritual practice or a part of a tradition and essentially that's not happening, or you're even backsliding, right? You're becoming more viceful, you're having more problems in your life, more difficulties, that is a sign that you need to change what you're doing immediately. When you are getting closer to the gods, you are becoming more like the gods. And so you should be more virtuous, more disciplined, and your quality of life should improve. If your quality of life is going down because of whatever path you're on, you're definitely on the wrong path, and you really need to reconsider what you're doing and go in a different direction. Now, my point number 3 is something that I'm sure is going to get me some heat in the comments, because this is something that I think a lot of people think and know, but just refuse to say out loud. And that is that not all esoteric paths are equal, right? So there's a lot of traditions out there in religion. There are literally thousands of mystic paths. There's Tantra, there's Hermeticism, there's Gnosticism, there's Christian mysticism, there's Sufism, there's all these things, right? There's so many. And, we don't all have to walk the same path. I'm not someone who believes there's one singular way to do things, but to say that all of these paths are equal and will benefit you equally is just crazy. Some of these paths are better than others, right? Just because you can get something out of all of these does not mean that they're all equivalent, right? Doing light worker meditation is not gonna get you the same results as being part of a Sufi order. It's just not that. That's not possible, and that's not equivalent. And so that is why when you are looking for what tradition to follow, you need to be very, very discerning. And if you realize you're on the wrong path, you need to redirect. I think a lot of people, when they get really committed to a tradition and spend a lot of time in it, they fall into this idea of the sunk cost fallacy where, oh, I put so much time and work into this, I have to stick with it, I can't just start over. But in the end, that ends up hurting you, right? If your path is not working and you think there's a better path, you should go down that better path. And there are definitely traditions that are better than other traditions. I think everyone believes this, they just they're often not honest about it. Do you really think Scientology is equivalent to the Eleusinian mysteries of ancient Greece? Like, do you honestly think that? If you say all paths are equal, you know, there's no difference between them, like, you would have to argue stuff like that. It doesn't make sense. They're not all equal, and that's okay. That's just reality. Now, my next hard truth about esotericism is one that a lot of people don't want to hear as well. And that is that psychedelics, a thing that people in this space are often very fascinated by or even involved with, or really any entheogen. There's a lot of other like ritual substance use that is out there besides psychedelics, many other things. But any of that, right? Using any sort of intoxicant, that's what I'll call them, to conduit a spiritual experience or help you get into a spiritual experience is not always helpful and is, in my opinion, not the best way to get knowledge. Now, I'm not saying that these practices don't have a place. They do. They're very good for opening doors, right? Like if you're really stuck, they can open a door, but you can't become reliant on them. And that's what I see a lot. I see a lot of people will have a spiritual experience that they've induced through psychedelics or whatever. And then every single time they want to have a spiritual experience, they end up going for psychedelics. And at that point, it's not benefiting you as a crutch, and it's a dependency. And we don't want to be dependent on anything. The only thing we want to be dependent on is the gods themselves, right? We don't want to be tethered to things like this. And honestly, it can lead to things like process addiction or health issues, right? All these things need to be discussed. I know that specifically certain practices that are like Dionysian in nature will have libations with alcohol. And I have known someone who they were doing that and they became an alcoholic and it really ended up harming their lives. And, you know, if they had not done the libations as frequently, they wouldn't have had that problem. And I think this is a conversation that people are too scared to have, but it needs to be had. As well, in many traditionalist cultures, someone pointed this out to me on Twitter, and then I double-checked it, and it does seem to check out. But basically what someone said on Twitter when I was talking about this is that in traditional shamanic, using that as an umbrella term, you can debate whether you think the word shaman is useful or not, cultures, basically, revelation that was made through drug use was not seen as equal to revelation on its own. A vision induced by, you know, say ayahuasca is not equivalent to a vision induced by invocation and trance. And I agree with this. I think that, you know, you can get every single mystical experience, you can get altered states of consciousness, you can get visions, you can get all these things without the use of any substances, which I know to the modern secular mind is like shocking. They're like, oh, well, that means you're crazy, whatever. But that's because we live in a secular materialist society that denies that religion exists. But you can have all of these experiences, even through things like breath control. Like if you've ever done the breath of fire, which is like a Kundalini yoga type breath, you know, you'll notice that it makes you feel kind of intoxicated just by the way you're breathing. Like there's so much you can do with just your mind and body that you don't really need these things. If you want to use them for a specific purpose as a gateway and using them traditionally and properly, I don't have an issue with it, but it can easily turn bad, and it is a far more risky practice than people make it out to be. Now, my next hard truth really applies to like the online esoteric community, specifically the like witchy section of it, like the people who found me because I used to be heavily involved and I still kind of am in witch talk, right? And that would be this implication through what people say that the left-hand path is superior to or better than the right-hand path. Now, I don't love the terms left-hand path and right-hand path because I think they are very subjective and honestly in the West don't have a lot of meaning. In the East, they essentially refer to like embracing taboos versus avoiding taboos, which is a pretty solid definition. That makes sense. But in the West, it's kind of became shorthand for like, you know, Goetia versus Theurgia, white magic, black magic, good magic, bad magic. Or if you're edgy enough, right? If you're edgy, you do dark stuff, you know, you hex people, you use demons, whatever, you know, your left-hand path. And what comes with that is people implying that that's cool, right? It's cool to be left-hand path. It's not cool to be right-hand path. It's not cool to be a mystic. It's not cool to care about virtue. It's not cool to do any of that. And so you get this implication, especially from witchy people, of like, oh, well, you know, I'm not one of those white Wiccans. I curse people. I do domination. And like, those things have consequences on your metaphysical body, whether you like it or not, whether you believe it comes back 3 times, which I don't really think makes a lot of theological sense. You know, I don't agree with that, but there are karmic consequences for these things. Like if you are doing rituals that tamper with people's will and that go against the law of the gods, like there will be penalties and you will acquire miasma. And when you acquire miasma, you need to seek out catharsis with the gods to alleviate that miasma so that you are in a better position moving forward, right? You can't, you know what I'm saying? Like you aren't better. And if anything, being left-hand path and doing these edgy things often makes your spiritual life harder, because you need to do a lot of purification if you're doing that and you want to maintain an upright spiritual path. And what happens is a lot of people don't do those purifications. And if you're dealing with heavy stuff and you're not purifying, like that's going to seep into you and honestly hurt you. And so these darker practices can be done. They're not inherently evil or whatever, right? But you have to do so much more if you do that. That this idea that the right-hand path is lesser is just sick. And it's a reflection of some of the problems in our culture and society. It's not good. You are not lesser for being right-hand path, and you're not a better esotericist for being left-hand path. Like, it's stupid. Now, my next point is something that I was taught when I was younger, and it's really stuck with me. And that is that mental, physical, and spiritual health are linked. Incredibly linked. If your health physically is failing or mentally is failing, your spiritual health is also going to fail. If your spiritual health is failing, so will your physical and so will your mental. If your mental health is failing, your physical and spiritual will fail too, right? These things are interlinked. And if you improve one, you will inevitably improve the rest. So it's important to stay mindful of things outside of just our spiritual health. I think in modern culture, we have this very compartmentalized mentality, right? Like, oh, this is my work time, this is my play time, this is my spiritual time, whatever, right? We put these things in boxes, we divide our day up into boxes. And metaphysically, the world is not compartmentalized like that. And what we do in the other boxes affects the box that we might think are separate, right? And so if you want to be a successful mystic, you do need to take care of yourself. You need to work on your mental health. You need to work on your psychology, and you do need to work on your physical health, right? You need to take care of yourself. You need to move. You need to not eat too little or not eat too much, right? You need to actually take care of yourself. And these things are hard, right? Mental, physical, and spiritual health. It's very easy to say, like, oh, just improve those things and they'll improve each other. A little harder done, but it is worth it, and it is worth trying to combine these things. In traditional cultures, specifically Eastern cultures, these things were not as divorced as they are in our current world, and historically they were not as divorced as they are now. And so remarrying these things and remembering how linked they all are to each other is going to really, really benefit you as a practitioner and make your path go so much better. Now, my next point is about spiritual systems. So if you are a mystic, you're probably part of some sort of spiritual system. And if you're not explicitly part of a existing spiritual system, you probably essentially default into something or have some sort of cohesive worldview. Now, if you don't agree with that, you're like, oh, my worldview's inconsistent, I do things that clash all the time, that is something you should sort out, because you do want a consistent spiritual worldview. You don't need to be like part of an orthodox religious group, like that's not what you need to do, but you do need some level of cohesion in what you believe and what you practice, because if you lack that cohesion, it will come out in your results and it will affect you. Now, once you have a system that is cohesive, you want your system to be totalist, totally, completely relating to all aspects of your life, right? And that is something shocking. I know that there was some TikTok I saw recently of a girl talking about some yoga tradition she was part of, and the yoga studio started encouraging her to eat in specific rules that follow the whatever philosopher they cite and their guru or whatever, and it had other like lifestyle recommendations, right? All these things, right? And that is actually a total spiritual system, one that has practices, philosophy, lifestyle guidelines, those things all together, right? A good system should have all of those things. Now, it does not need to be fully totalitarian and authoritarian, right? You don't need rules about how to open doors or how to shower or whatever. There are some spiritual systems that have those rules. I think that's a little bit much, but you do need some sort of guideline, right? Your spiritual practice should not exist in isolation where it's like, oh, I draw a sigil and that's it. Like, that's everything I do. Like, I don't have any philosophical relation to what I'm doing. I don't have any, lifestyle relation to what I'm doing. Like try to find a system that is total. And the reality is you might actually be interfacing with a system that is total that you have not realized is total, right? You haven't looked into, like, yoga. I use the example of yoga. Yoga is not stretching, right? Yoga is not just a workout, right? Yoga has a philosophy, it has lifestyle guidelines, it has a lot of other stuff to it. And if you want to be a yogi, you should be doing those other things, right? And this applies to every spiritual system. So, look into that and seek out a system that is total, because at the end of the day, everything we experience is metaphysical, everything we do has a spiritual dimension, and a good spiritual path should address all of those things. Now, the next hard truth is something that's not going to come to a surprise for half you guys, and it's going to piss off the other half. And that is that spiritual pollution is real, right? Miasma is real. I don't love the word sin because I'm not a Christian, but that is real, like that kind of concept, right? It's cross-cultural, right? That there are certain things you could do. You could either say it's against, it causes you to build up negative karma or whatever, right? There are things you do in your life that affect you metaphysically, and you need to take accountability for these things and fix them if you want to, progress. I think this is really true. And, these rules don't exist for no reason. They're often things that actively harm us, and they are taboo or forbidden because, the gods don't want us to get hurt. So trying to be virtuous and avoiding things that are in this category of behaviors is going to really, really benefit you and should be done. So the next hard truth is if you are living in the West, specifically if you're in the Anglo sphere, if you're a fellow American, America, fuck yeah, right? You probably suffer with latent atheism. I just wrote an essay about this on my Substack, but no one else, to my knowledge, there probably is someone else who's addressed this at some point, has really talked about this phenomenon that I've started calling latent atheism. And the term latent means like underlying and existing. There's a term that a lot of pagans were using for a while called latent Christianity, which is basically ex-Christians who still have so many underlying Christian beliefs and assumptions that they still behave like a Christian, even though they have nominally left Christianity. But I think that's actually less of a problem than latent atheism because we live in a secular culture. And so if you are going from a secular life, a secular worldview, a materialist worldview, right into mysticism, you're going to have a lot of things you have to wrestle with, right? I think about how many people are even spiritual teachers or writers who don't literally believe in this stuff, right? They think the gods are just psychological or something, right? And they're not, true believers in what they're teaching. And that I always find startling and a little crazy. But that is latent atheism. I know so many people who are like doing rituals and they're like, well, I had this crazy spiritual experience. And they're like, oh, but it was just my mind. Like they try to like rationalize it. They try to bring it back into the post-enlightenment framework that we live in. They try to really, really put their experience through that lenses. And often these experiences are not processed best through those lenses. And so unlearning your latent atheism is really beneficial because you most likely have it on some level. There are some outliers, like if you did grow up in a super religious Christian home, or you grew up, I know there are quite a few like people who grew up like Muslim, or that I don't know, whatever it is you grew up in, if you grew up in a religious household, right, probably you're going to be dealing with something different than this. But if you didn't, or you grew up in like a nominally religious household, but like they only really do Christmas and Easter, they don't really believe, you probably also have some latent atheism to sift through. Now, my last hard truth about mysticism and the occult is one that's kind of hard to talk about because I think people really go to extremes with this topic, and I'd like to offer a nuanced perspective on it. And that is mental illness and esoteric practice. So a lot of people struggle with mental illness, especially in postmodern society that's really not geared towards human prosperity and happiness, right? Like, we really aren't meant to be spending 8 hours a day typing in spreadsheets and on Zoom meetings, right? We are not meant to be living like this. We're not meant to be in, little pods. Like we're not meant to live like this. And so, a lot of people are suffering consequences of that. We're way more alienated than we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be far more community oriented, all these things. But a lot of people struggle with mental illness. And this also would include traumas, like if something really traumatic has happened to you that does affect your mental health, or even like physical conditions or disabilities or whatever, right? Any sort of thing you struggle with. So if you become a mystic and you really struggle with something, no matter what that thing is, it is going to make it harder. And it does mean you should go slower than someone who does not have these problems. Now, a lot of people will say that it doesn't matter, it doesn't affect you, right? These things, it's whatever, like you're still going to be a good mystic, you're still going to have these things. And you absolutely can. You can be a good mystic and have problems. But to say it's not going to be harder or that you might not have to adjust things is just lying to people. Now, the other extreme is some people say that if you have some sort of mental condition, you should absolutely never get into the esoteric because it'll make your condition worse, it'll mess you up. And if you go about it the wrong way, yeah, it probably can make your condition worse. Like there are ways you can mess yourself up with spirituality. But if you do struggle, you're in a bad place, I actually think more than ever you actually need religion, you need the gods, you need esotericism, because in that point you need help, you need connection, and this stuff can really, really improve your quality of life. It's going to be different than someone who doesn't have these problems, but it still can benefit you. Like, I think, for example, I remember I was talking to a girl who had a past with anorexia, and she was doing some sort of big ritual where she had to ritualistically fast. And she was really freaked out about this idea because she thought it would make her mental health condition worse. And I remember saying to her, well, you cannot fast. I just said it hard. I'm like, that you're not going to be able to do that because that'll just harm you. And what it'll do is take the intention of what you're trying to do and warp it into something else and essentially warp the practice. So instead, just eat something bland all day. Like, eat something unpleasurable. That will be your fast. Or fast from technology, or, you know, there's a lot of other things you can do. In many rituals, you can make substitutions. There are some times where you cannot make substitutions. There might be specific rituals you cannot do, but a lot of the time you can make substitutions. You know, you can make it work for you. So, you know, mental illness is a hurdle, but it's not a wall. And so I don't really think there's any condition that fully blocks you from esotericism. There are some that make it particularly hard, but it's not, you know what I mean? It's not the end of everything. It's not over. So that's all I have to say about my hard truths about mysticism and the occult. If you want to find me, I am on Instagram, TikTok, Substack. I host the podcast, Postmodern Iconoclast, which is on this YouTube channel and on most podcasting platforms. And I'm supported through Patreon. If you join the Patreon, you get every video early. You get a bonus video every single month. You get my ritual guides, and if you're a high enough tier, you get to meet with me once a month, and we do a kind of like mentorship type thing. Or you can take that time to just talk with me and get your questions answered about metaphysics, however you want to use that time. You get to meet with me once a month, you know, on a call. So it's very fun. As well, I am hosting that trip with India. I mentioned at the beginning of the video. You can register that below. And I also am a tarot reader. If you want to book a tarot reading with me, I will read for you. My email is in the description box, and you send an email to that and we will set it up. So yeah, that's all I have to say. Please like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell. And subscribe for 93 days. Go meet your whole guardian angel, and you'll never need to know any of these things again. You won't need to know any hard truths, only the soft truths. All right.